Okay, thank you. Thank you, David. I'm told we have about 30 minutes. We want to keep this very informal. I have props with me. I'm going to try to flip through them at some point. But I wanted to begin by inviting first Ronnie and then Meredith to tell us a little bit about their postal code. You hear maybe their their DNA code also, but their postal code, and just to set the stage for where Precision Child Health came from. I think it's seated in the history and background of these two individuals and others in the room. So, quickly, right back to the beginning, Ronnie, and then how you ended up through your training to come up with conceptualize the idea of precision child health. I'm going to ask you later to define it, so you don't have to go there.
Okay, so it's a different question than he told me he's going to ask. Okay, but I actually kind of like it. Okay, so let's think about the postal codes in my life. So I actually learned about the concept of individualized medicine just when I stopped, when I started my residency in Germany. I actually didn't know back then that that's what it was all about, but I tell you what happened when I had to round with my German professors, and that's a big deal because German professors are cruel. And I remember during my, I think, second or third week or so, I had a patient I presented and I said, I want to do an x-ray. And one of the professors was really mad at me, asking me, why do you want to do an x-ray? And I actually didn't have a good answer. So, but I knew next time I wanted to do an x-ray, I had to know why. In hindsight, that was my beginning of individualized medicine. So moving the postal code from Germany to the United States, when I started my residency all over again, because I love studying, at Hopkins, I remember also within the first few days I started, I had rounds and I had to present my patient to Dr. Barton Childs. So anybody in this audience who know who Barton Childs is? 2 people. It's fine. He is the father of the concept of individualized medicine. He wrote a book, which I figured out this week. I lent to somebody and never got back. So I don't want to bring it here, but I had to order it again and it's not coming until December. Anyway, but I was presenting a patient to him and then he was asking me, so what's your differential diagnosis? And what do young residents do, or medical students? They want to show off. So I was showing off and listing like 15 different differential diagnoses. And he looked at me and said, you come to my office after rounds. I'm like, oh my God, I'm in trouble. And then that was the beginning of my teachings with him. Every Friday afternoon, if he and I had time, I would sit in his office. He would put his feet on the desk. He always was wearing red socks. And I thought there was a special meaning. The only reason why he was wearing the red socks is because these were the only socks his son was not stealing from him. But he was downloading all his knowledge to me about the concept of individualized medicine. So moving the postal code now to Canada, I had an opportunity with all of you to actually bring his original vision to life. I wish he would be alive to see this because I know he would be incredibly proud of this.
Is the book you referred to the metabolic basis of disease?
No,
was it that one? It's a different one, right?
No, it's called Genetics, a Logic to Disease. It is so complicated that I will admit to you that I probably don't really understand it. I've read it 3 times in my life. It's the reason why nobody knows of him, because nobody can understand this book. So you have to sit in his office and listen to him. And if you do it over and over again, at some point it clicked in my head saying, okay, that's what this is all about.
So most human geneticists know of him. Icon in the field at Hopkins, and he co-authored Metabolic Basis of Disease with Charles Schreiber, Canadian scientist, and many of us have read that book. I looked for it on the weekend. I couldn't find my copy either, which is bizarre. I'm not sure who we're lending these to. Okay, over to Meredith Irwin.
Okay, that wasn't the question exactly, but I'll think about a different answer. So there's probably a lot of different people who influence. Oh, it's not working. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Give it a second. Okay.
Okay, Ronnie does this a lot. You always have to learn from those around you. So I guess the postal code where I had the most influence was 02139. So that's a zip code in Boston. And I went there at 18 to start my undergraduate studies, which was at MIT. I was a bit of a math geek in the old days, still a little bit of a math geek. But I sort of started trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I would say that what I really liked was solving problems and thinking about problems. And somewhere along the way, we only have a few minutes, but I'll just say somewhere along the way, being surrounded by what at the time was really a genetic evolution in cancer, where we started realizing 30 years ago that viruses didn't really cause all of cancers, but they were the genes that viruses had in them. And there was a man named Robert Weinberg, who was one of my professors and is pretty much one of the fathers of cancer genetics, who helped to identify two of the most important genes, which now actually have, one of them has a drug, the RAS oncogene, and also was very critical to the retinoblastoma gene. And there's a lot of history at SickKids about that as well. That's really where I started to get excitement. The TAs I worked with, the labs, I never knew what a lab was when I went to MIT, but being in a lab and seeing people getting excited about figuring out what all these genes did really made me want to understand more. I still wanted to be a doctor. I went to medical school. I'll fast forward to my training, but I think, again, the revolution of what do genes mean in cancer was really where I got my start. My first day of fellowship, I was an oncology fellow at the Dana-Farber and Boston Children's. I had to consent a patient for a research study. Every patient we treated was on a research study. Every patient we treated got a little extra tube with consent for research. And we were learning before our eyes that we no longer just decided how to treat cancer based on your age and what it looked like under the microscope, but also based on these genes that I was seeing cloned in the lab, like across the street from where I was training. So I think for me, just seeing in real life how we started to change how we treated patients based on what we saw with our eyes and with our microscopes to all of this information. Today, of course, we get genetic information, tetrabytes of data daily. Back then it would take years of people. So I'm looking at David Balkin, who was there a little before me. But I think it just took years and years to find these genes. But I still remember, some of you may know who Todd Golub is. He is sort of one of the founders of the Broad Institute, one of the newer fathers of genomics. And I remember when he was a fellow, I remember the patient whose blood he cloned one of the very important genes for cancer from. I remember the first time he and his collaborators used a microarray, the very first microarrays, to show that you could look at the genes in cells and tell AML from ALL. That paper had like one figure in science, and that really shifted how we thought about things. And I have to say, being surrounded by people who are excited about the science, but also excited about using that to change the course of our patients, really changed how I thought about oncology, but also about medicine in general. And I think really excited me at the time to sort of take this journey. And I still remember my very first patient where we learned about the genes that were involved in his tumor, couldn't use it at the time, but now it really makes a difference.
Had many trainees here who spent time with the names that you had mentioned. Bob Weinberg, of course. Sean Egan was a postdoc or PhD student there. David rubbed shoulders and many others here. So there's a common theme that emerges: mentorship and training and influence, i.e. your postal code, your environment on people's careers, their thoughts, their ideas. I'm going to ask you to help me a little bit. Hold that for a second.
Of course.
Okay, precision child health. I'll come to that in a second.
Oh.
So, this is a term that Ronald Cohn coined here. And so he's the inventor of the term, influenced by people like Barton Charles and others. And I think it's an initiative, a movement here at SickKids. We co-authored this book that I'll hold up in a moment, called Genetics and Genomics in Medicine. It's the #1 selling medical genomics textbook in the world. Plug. With Ada Hamush, and as part of the book, I asked Ronnie to actually define precision child health, and it's at the end of the chapter that him and Iris Cohn co-authored together. So I'm going to read that to you, and then I want to hear, Ronnie, how that came about, and if you got it right, or if you want to change it. Because this just came out like last year, essentially. So here we go. Precision Child Health, PCH, refers to a concept and movement to transform pediatric healthcare through the integration of data from all domains of a child's determinants of health, those being genes, biology, and environment. This must go along with the patient-reported perceptions of their health and objectively measured physiology in order to predict, prevent, diagnose, and treat disease in a targeted, individualized way. Application of bioinformatics, I would say informatics, computing tools, and advanced statistical approaches applied to these integrated data resources will support the evaluation and discovery of rapid, accurate, and cost-effective diagnostics, individualized therapies, and enhanced drug safety and efficacy. Insights unlocked by PCH will fuel the next generation of data-guided quality improvement initiatives and preventative care. This strategy has the potential to radically transform our approach to healthcare delivery by unlocking efficiencies, decreasing preventable harm, and enhancing our approaches to patient-centered care that will eventually be extrapolated to all of medicine. Now, before I turn it over to you, I wanted to just put in people's minds, until Ronnie got here, my definition of precision medicine, because that's the term many of us used before, and it's kind of evolved out of cancer really being as a prototypical form of precision medicine, was that you would find the gene that was involved or the protein, you would develop diagnostics, and then you would use advanced technologies to develop therapeutics and then try to turn that into some type of a pharmacological or an intervention treatment. And then through Ronnie's definition, this greatly expanded. So you want to talk a little bit about how this came to you and why PCH is different, and essentially why we're having this discussion today.
Yeah, so thank you, Steve. Steve is right. Even when I came here from Johns Hopkins initially as the head of genetics, and then Steve and I were co-directing the Center of Genetic Medicine, and we talked about precision medicine. Really what we were talking about is how do we get genome sequencing up and running here at SickKids in our clinic. And I actually don't know whether Anna remembers. It was a conversation several years later. I was chief of pediatrics at this point already, where she and I spoke a little bit about what precision medicine is and what it's not. And it was that conversation. It was that conversation that made me think, if we really want to think about how to provide individualized care, we have to think much broader, because there's so much more to our patients than, quote, just the genetic code. And that was the conversation. Do you remember this? She doesn't remember. I told her. See, I never really told her, but I remember walking away and thinking, so let's just think about all these wonderful people who all across the spectrum of a child and a family we are already doing research, right? We have the genomic scientists, of course, but we have so many clinician researchers who are looking at physiological profiles, other omes like the microbiome, the proteome, and then we have obviously so many of our scientists who think about the social determinants of health, which have been, I think, utterly ignored outside of that group of scientists. And I think having now the technologies available to us to not just bring the people together, we always talk about how do we bring research and the hospital together. So here is yet another vehicle for bringing everybody together with their data and integrated using now AI and other technologies. That is going to give us a full picture of one individual patient. And that's how this originated. And I think it was very kind of Steve to say that I coined this, and maybe that's true, but if I look at this room, you don't know how happy it makes me that so many people are here, because I think we are actually able to make this happen because everybody is kind of on board now. And it will make the life and the way how we care for our children better. I know it, and I promise you, you will see this in the years to come.
I asked ChatGPT, Google AI, and Copilot who invented PCH. His name came up. So
Showed it to me. It came up as the former CEO, so I'm not going anywhere.
my point is, it's important to do multiple experiments to validate yours. Meredith, do you want to add to that and really the difference? You're the chief of pediatrics and the difference between medicine. And certainly when I think of SickKids, we think of treating, people who have disease and they need, but health and the concept of health, and just
Sure.
add to the definition of PCH.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you alluded to this, Steve, when you said, initially you thought this was all about coming up with a gene and then eventually a treatment and that was what it was. And then Ronnie started talking about how there's so much more to it. I think using all of this information, and it's more than just the omics that we've heard about, but all of this information to come up with the best approach to our patient. That doesn't always mean a treatment. We heard this morning about how it can just give you your diagnosis and some clarity. It can also mean not to treat. Like, I think we don't talk enough about that here. And that's something, I'll take some credit in oncology. It's something we think a lot about as we do better with some of our treatments, which don't come without potentially long-term sequelae. Maybe we need to start figuring out who we don't need to treat or treat so aggressively. So I think putting a different spin on it is also just thinking of the whole approach to our patients. And I want to put a plug in. Ronnie alluded to this. We've talked about how PCH involves the whole team. And I think of my own team. We've heard how Ronnie's at the bedside. I still see patients in clinic. The history, the stories our patients tell us so much about it. Sometimes reflects their genetics, but sometimes it just tells us more about how to treat them. And that information doesn't just come from the history that the fellows or the residents or I get. I will get huge amounts of information from the social worker I work with. I will get huge amounts of information from our entire team. I learned how to consent patients from the research nurse on our team. So I just want to, and I was actually in a case, we do these chair rounds with the residents, and the residents were talking about a case, and it was a very complicated case. They usually pick these cases. They don't even tell me the answer. So it's very interesting to sort of sit through this. But the critical piece of history from the resident actually came from, or for the family, came from our abilities team. And one of the nurses in the abilities team who got a very critical piece of that history. So I think we really have to remember this is teamwork, and that helped the team come up with a very unique diagnosis, which we would think of as a PCH sort of diagnosis, but it really took that whole team working together and the stories. I think we have to go back still to the stories our patients tell us. And I have numerous examples of the story leading to a scientific breakthrough. And I think, we forget about that a lot, but we can learn a lot from our patients.
Great. Just to continue on the topic, Ronnie, this is just the start of the journey. I call precision child health 21st century medicine. I just think, we're a little bit ahead of the game here. But this will be ongoing for the century for sure. But what's in your mind, the earliest success so far of PCH here at SickKids or elsewhere?
I would say, in addition to having now whole genome sequencing available as a clinical test, not for everybody, but at least for a significant portion of patients. I think if I look at the early successes of precision child health and what we have done here, it's our our opportunity and now knowing how to run an N-of-1 gene therapy trial that we started 2 years ago here. It's our pharmacogenetics program that is changing the care of various services already. So I am always excited when I'm on rounds, like yesterday, and one of the nurses is asking me, have we done pharmacogenetic testing for this child that is taking a proton pump inhibitor? Well, that's success, right? That is success if it's not me who's thinking about this all the time, because I know somebody very well who's leading this program, but that's another success. And then I think you heard in the first session about Sky and how we are beginning to deploy some of these algorithms into clinic already. So this is what's happening right now. and just think about what the next few years are going to hold. I guess you're going to ask me later. I'll tell you what my dream for all of this in 5 to 10 years is. But here you have some really early successes, plus one other thing. And that I'm not quite sure we are there yet, because there is no money involved in this. It's a bit the cultural shift in thinking. And I see it a little bit when I'm on the floor, and I hear it a little bit, but I probably don't hear it enough. And what I mean by that is we still tend to get frustrated, upset, nervous when things don't work the way we expect them to work, like we have studied it or like a textbook told us. And if we can just change all of our mind shift towards appreciating that there's a biological message that a child is telling us. There's a reason, unless we, God forbid, make a mistake, which sometimes happens, but let's say that's not the case. These children are telling us something. And that's just a mind shift that doesn't necessarily lead you to an answer, but it's the mind shift that changes. And I think there we have a bit more to go. Because truth of the matter is, as most of you know, 80% of the kids that we see don't do what we think they should be doing. They all have a really important message. So let's start listening to it, and let's then start figuring out how we can figure out what that message is.
Excellent. Would you like to continue?
Yeah, it's always a challenge to follow Ronnie because he gives these great answers. I totally agree with Ronnie. I think our patients are often N of ones, not just the trials that we're trying to treat them with. And I think as I alluded to before, we have to take these stories our patients are telling us or the exceptions to the rules that we've all learned about and leverage that and learn from it. We all have stories of how one patient's, gene or other diagnosis has led us to something that's taught us more universally. And I know I talk a lot about cancer. It's obviously been a huge love of mine for 3 years to try to come up with treatments, but really this movement, as we've talked about, is everywhere. We have 18 different divisions in pediatrics. Every single division has a story that is precision medicine. Surgery at this institution is really also using that approach, whether it's the movement disorders that are treated now by George Abraham in the OR, with deep brain stimulation, and figuring out which of the patients who are going to benefit from that. I just want people to realize this is everywhere. It involves our colleagues in every department. That's one of my messages I really want to get through. We couldn't do this without radiology, as we've already heard about. We couldn't do this without DPLM and the lab tests. We've just learned that we can now, in a clinical test, diagnose some of the genetic abnormalities in the blood without biopsying the tumors of our patients. There's been a lot of research in that, but thanks to Cynthia Hawkins and our colleagues here, we can now do that in a number of weeks in a test that can go in the chart. These are things that were science fiction a few years ago.
That's my next question.
Oh, sorry.
I wanted to just mention, the purpose of having these discovery dialogues is to comment on the historical progress, particularly at this institution, has influenced our decision-making today. And you mentioned a lot of the successes in cancer were completed here by some people in the room. The paradigm that is used in the United States for precision medicine is the cystic fibrosis story, of course, and with the gene being identified here in 1989, after 10 years of research that was led by actually collecting the patients here in the clinic that drove and allowed the linkage study, and then the implementation over time of technology. Those who are generalists in the audience, what's really incredible is many of us 20 years ago were writing into our grants things that are not now happening today. And when we wrote those, I remember when Lapchi wrote the first grant after the gene was discovered, it kind of laid out what would happen. And but no one believed it. To be honest, no one really believed it, but there was a sense of hope. That's the most important thing. And then the technologies came in place that allowed it to happen. And I think the technologies we have now are just incredible. When I teach my first year class, I tell them that the limits of what they can do are only bound by their creativity now. So on that topic, what major, I have to script this here, what unrealized discovery do you think maybe in the future that's going to enable precision child health to take us to the very next level, Ronnie? For Meredith,
Oh, yeah. Oh.
for me, it would be to have a ubiquitous way to get all pharmacological treatments across the blood-brain barrier, for example, something just going to change the day like CRISPR did and other things. But do you have any ideas on that topic?
Well, I mean, I alluded to it. I think being able in cancer and other cancer for sure, to not have to stick needles in children and to actually get these diagnoses out of their bloodstream or urine or some other sample where, you know, it's really just so hard to always have to do painful procedures to our patients. And similarly, if I think of all the infectious diseases we're dealing with, if we could come up with some bedside diagnostics, whether that's genetics or other things, to diagnose some of these things in real time, I think it would make a huge difference also, because I think infectious disease is still one of the biggest issues across the entire population that we take care of.
Okay, Ronnie?
Now it's working. All right, I will try to take this to the kind of science fiction maybe level, but I tell you what my dream is. It is my dream. My dream is that maybe in 10 years from now, every single child that comes through our door has one way or another, whether that's a chip that they carry in their pocket or us having access to all of the biological, social determinants, health of data that we have that immediately accessible, and that we have immediately an opportunity to identify what is the right treatment at this time for this patient. Having a predictive approach to figuring out, are you one of the kids who's going to respond to what we usually do? Or are you one of the children who requires something different? Right now, everybody knows it happens by experience. You do something, if it works, great. If it doesn't work, you try something different. I think my dream, and I think we can get there, is to know this ahead of time, and that requires every single child and their family to have all these data that we are talking about easily accessible, whether it's them carrying this around and us accessing it through there or through our own systems. That's kind of where this is like 10 years from now, but that's where I think we need to go.
And how much does educating the public so they know how to use that information, is that involved? And how much investment should we make in that, educating the public so they understand what's available to?
I ended up with a bad microphone. Anyway, so I believe it's probably critical for us to educate every single person about it. And educating means if you actually sit down and tell somebody, we want to treat you or we want to treat your child as an individual, it's kind of these no-brainer things. Nobody's going to say, no, I don't want that. Everybody's saying, yeah, of course. But we need to actually explain to our population what this means, that it requires us to know much more about your child than people ever expected. And that means we need to collect data. I mean, we know from adults, we don't know this from children, we know from adults that they're actually excited and willing to share their data, want their data shared. I'm not quite sure I'm not saying it's not true for pediatrics, but nobody has this studied whether parents are as happy to share the data of their child as they're happy to share their own data. So the education is important because without the data, it's not going to happen, right? And I think trying to explain these concepts a bit deeper than beyond the obvious tagline is going to be critical.
Can I add to that? I'm looking at Steve and thinking of, also aspirational. This would be great if we have in 10 years, all this data and we know how to treat the patient in front of us. But for those patients that we still won't know how to treat, I would love a more seamless and quick way of modeling, whether it's their tumor, whether it's the bacteria causing a problem, whatever is going on, working with clinician scientists, colleagues to really figure out how in real time we can discover something or model a treatment to figure out what to do and not do that, over 10 years and come back and say, if only we knew this, we would have treated this patient that way. So sort of an ability to do real-time avatars for our most difficult patients that we get.
So I would,
Real-time avatars.
Real-time
Real-time
avatars.
avatars, right.
It's hard to point something with Ronnie.
so I think it becomes a responsibility of all of us and all of us in the room to make sure we educate our families, our patients, of course, the entire public and policymakers and on what science and research is and how it plays out. We did a webinar yesterday on the topic of autism for Autism Ontario, and I had to start by explaining what genes were, and it was kind of disappointing that everybody learns about this in grade school now, but people need to accept that science will drive not only medicine but all of society forward, and it has to be places like SickKids that continues to educate them. Okay, here's the last question that they didn't know was coming at all. No, this is so I had a quick story. When Ronnie first came, the first lecture, he pointed to the Craig Venter's genome sequence and said this was the first paper, got him thinking about precision medicine. And then he didn't know that I was a co-author on the papers.
No, actually.
But it was the first, it was really, in the Discovery Dialogues theme, of course, we interviewed him and we talked about the first time we presented him with his genome sequence, which was a unique experience in history of science. So last question, you only get this once, you get one crack at this, and I don't ask this very often. And I start with Meredith. What can so I'm the chief of the research, what can the Research Institute do to help move your mandate in precision child health along?
I think, there are some amazing technologies that our colleagues are developing. Steve has, there's just many, I'd call them almost like science toys, things that people can do. If I were thinking of what I would love to see happen, probably now, not necessarily futuristic even, there are these great questions, these unmet questions, unmet needs our patients have. I wish we had a better way of applying these tools to the biggest questions that we have in nephrology or in neurosurgery. I wish we just had a better way of communicate. I mean, we are communicating. I've had some of my best discussions, in the tower and the hallways with different people, but figuring out how to make sure we're matching these great technologies with what the dire needs are for our patients and families so that we can really answer the questions that matter most. I myself figured out to work with zebrafish. You heard about zebrafish this morning as a quicker way of answering questions about what things meant for a particular tumor I'm interested in. I think we just need these dialogues more and more so that the questions we answer in the lab or use these great CFIs, these Canada Foundation for Innovation technologies that we get really in real time are going to answer questions that our patients need.
Thank you. Ronnie?
Oh, it's just always 3 seconds. So with the risk of coming across as cheesy, which I really don't want to, this entire movement is going to have its ongoing origin and discovery in the Research Institute. We will not be able to proceed with precision child health if we don't do the necessary research that's going to help us inform anything that we want to do. I mean, let's talk about the N-of-1 gene therapy trial that occurred in research. Let's talk about other genome editing therapies that we will give to our patients. That happens in the lab of my colleague over there, Dr. Zhenya Everkeen. The pharmacogenetic testing that we do today started at research. And now, most importantly, we have been talking about getting all these data together, right? So we need to do the research to bring the data together to understand what it actually means. Because there will be, if we begin to integrate social determinants of health and genetic and, let's say, microbiome data, there will be hundreds of scientific questions that we need to answer before we then actually can get to the point that I told you earlier, that in 10 years, we have these data all available and they're actually going to tell us what to do. Without research, it's not going to happen. So I hope you like that answer.
That's very good. You didn't ask for money. That's good.
Cheesy.
Cheesy.
I would just close by Meredith mentioned the Canada Foundation for Innovation. We put together a large infrastructure grant that will enable technologies. And when, I think historically, and probably even to this day, when people think of the Research Institute, they think of the PGCRL building alone, but in fact, it's not. It's all of you here. It goes, Research Institute goes right across the organization, right across the hospital. And in the figure 1 of the grant, we draw a schematic of the right side of the institute towards Bay Street, and then the left side towards University. And the bridge tying us together is Precision Child Health under an infinity loop where information flows back and forth. And I think that really is the vision captured in the original definition of Precision Child Health, Ronnie. And we will land there. And today, he's good. I know he gets. It's my boss. He gets the last word. But it's really the fact that we had this event and such an amazing. It's the second or third one now. Such an amazing turnout is we're really a long way down that road. But over to you.
Just briefly, give me 30 seconds because I see Malika here, and I'm sorry I missed you earlier because I was rounding. We recently had Accreditation Canada here, and the lead accreditor, when I spoke about Precision Child Health, actually misheard me and was talking about what we think, what I said to her. And it was brilliant that she misheard me because I love her quote, and I want to leave you with this quote. I spoke to her about that our patients never read the textbook. And she said, well, you are now on a path where your patients are going to help you write the next textbook, like you. And that's exactly what it is. I didn't invent that. Our accreditor did. And I've been using it ever since. Thank you.